Chapter 1. The Marigold Bookmark. A gentle autumn mist cold through the narrow streets of Bloomsbury as Hercule Poirot alighted from the hansom cab in front of the venerable Athenaeum Club. The lamplit entrance bore the club's brass plaque, its letters worn by nearly a century of distinguished members. Poirot adjusted his bowler hat, tucking his cane beneath his arm, and stepped onto the polished marble floor. The club's silence was a velvet welcome after the clamour of London's afternoon bustle. He had received a discreet summons that morning from Lady Winifred Ashcombe, a distinguished member of the Literary Society and an old friend of Hastings. The note penned in her graceful copperplate had merely read, "Monsieur Poirot, I entreat your keen intellect to unravel a most peculiar puzzle concerning a rare book and a hidden Marigold bookmark. Pray come at your earliest convenience." Intrigued by the promise of intellectual diversion and guided by his unerring little grey cells, Poirot had promised his presence within the hour. The club's reading room was hushed and book-lined, its high windows draped in burgundy velvet, soft lamplight pulled on the leather armchairs, and the long mahogany table strewn with manuscripts. Lady Ashcombe, an elegant woman approaching her 50th year, rose from her seat with the poise of a practised hostess. Silver hair was swept into a chignon, and her evening gown of deep saffron echoed the hue of the blossom in question. "Ah, mon cher Poirot, how fortunate that you could come so promptly," she said, offering him a seat. Her voice quavered ever so slightly, betraying a deep undercurrent of unease. "I fear this matter is more perplexing than I initially imagined." Poirot inclined his head courteously. "Madam, your convenience is my priority. Pray, tell me this puzzle in your own words." Lady Ashcombe laid a slender volume before him, an 1898 first edition of the Botanist's Almanac, leather-bound and gilt-edged. "This," she said, "was bequeathed to me by my late husband, Lord Ashcombe, a fervent collector of botanical lore. Yesterday I discovered a pressed marigold freshly dried in the middle of the book, serving as a bookmark at page 312. The curious thing is that I placed no such flower there, nor did my husband." She paused, drawing in a thoughtful breath. Poirot's dark eyes glimmered as he examined the pressed bloom's delicate petals, now faded to amber. "Page 312, he mused, running a gloved finger along the gilt lettering. "Let us see." Gently, he opened the page to reveal a passage on the rare Taggart's angustifolia. Known for its subtle fragrance and modest blooms, the text described its medicinal uses and its symbolism of remembrance. Lady Ashcombe covered her mouth with a slender hand. "Precisely. That entry had no special significance until this morning, when I found this flower, and then I received a note, slipped beneath my door, bearing only these words: 'The marigold remembers what the heart forgets.' No signature, no other clue." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "A message, then, embedded within your husband's cherished volume. But what could it signify, beyond poetic sentiment?" He closed the book and leaned back thoughtfully. "Madam, does this book contain any other personal annotations or marginalia in your husband's hand?" Lady Ashcombe shook her head. "None. He prized the text's purity and never marked a page. I, myself, have never written in it." "Curious." Poirot tapped the table. "And did Lord Ashcombe ever speak to you of any rival collectors or associates who might wish to send a message?" She glanced at the portrait of her late husband on the Waller painting, capturing his genial smile, set amid a greenhouse of exotic flowers. Her voice faltered. "He had no enemies that I knew. He collaborated with scholars across Europe. Yet in the last weeks of his life, he grew increasingly secretive, spending hours in the library, emerging each evening with a thoughtful frown." Poirot nodded. "And when did he pass away?" "2 nights ago," she whispered, "suddenly, of a heart ailment, though he seemed in robust health only days earlier." A soft shiver passed over Poirot. "Madam, you must forgive my forwardness, but this puzzle arrives at a painful juncture. The Marigold Bookmark appeared after his death. Lady Ashcombe's eyes filled with tears. Yes, I found it this morning. Upon my waking, I feared it. Was a posthumous message either from him, impossibly, or from someone who knew of his secret studies?" Poirot clasped his hands. "Then our inquiry begins at the crossroads of the personal and the cryptic. The marigold, symbol of remembrance, you found it placed deliberately. Who had access to the library after Lord Ashcombe's passing?" She considered. "Only myself, my secretary, Miss Clara Benton, and the butler, Mr. Garrick. The servants retire by 10 o'clock, and the library door is locked each evening." "Excellent," Poirot murmured. "We shall meet with each in turn. But first, allow me to inspect this marigold more closely." He drew the pressed blossom from the book with delicate precision and held it beneath the lamp. The fine veins of the petals glowed amber. "Notice, madam, these minute pinpricks along the petals, edge almost too uniform to be natural. Someone pierced the bloom to affix it with a pin." "Yes," Lady Ashcombe gasped. "I never thought to examine it so closely. It was simply there flat, as though it had always belonged." Poirot placed the flower on a clean sheet of paper, and the note, "Does the paper bear any watermark or distinctive quality?" She produced a folded slip of fine stationery, now yellowed at the edges. Poirot unfolded it, inhaling gently. No scent, no watermark, yet the grain of the paper is unusual, very smooth. "Almost like a calling card folded in half." Lady Ashcombe nodded. "Indeed. It is the same paper used in the club's correspondence. How it reached me, I cannot say." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "Then our first step is to examine the scene of its delivery." He stood, adjusting his coat. "Madam, I shall need to visit your library, meet your secretary and your butler, and inspect the lock mechanism on that door. Every detail, however small, may guide us toward the purveyor of this puzzle and perhaps reveal a motive far more personal than poetry." As he buttoned his coat, Lady Ashcombe's relief was palpable. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot. You bring hope where I felt only mystery." Poirot offered her a gentle smile. "Hope, madam, is the light that shines brightest in the darkest riddles. Let us step into the library and see which shadows yield their secrets." Together they crossed the club's marble foyer, the autumn mist swirling beyond the glass doors. Inside, the mystery of the Marigold Bookmark awaited the man whose little grey cells could illuminate even the most delicate of enigmas. And so began the curious case of the Marigold Bookmark, one that would test Poirot's ingenuity and touch upon secrets both botanical and human, weaving a puzzle whose final revelation would surprise even the keenest mind. Thought for a couple of seconds. Chapter 2. The first close late that afternoon, the library at Lady Ashcombe's Bloomsbury residence lay hushed under rows of towering volumes. The fading light filtered through stained glass, tinting the leather-bound spines in amber and russet. Poirot entered, accompanied by Lady Ashcombe, to retrace the steps by which the Marigold Bookmark and its cryptic note had reached her. The heavy oak door stood ajar, its brass escutcheon unmarred, the lock in pristine condition. Poirot approached the lock with deliberate slowness. He knelt on the Persian carpet and passed his gloved finger over the keyhole. "Observe, madam," he murmured. No sign of forced entry. He produced a swab from his inner coat pocket and lightly collected residue at the lip of the keyhole. "Yet the bookmark was placed only after your late husband's passing. Whoever entered did so with your own key or a most skilful imitation." Lady Ashcombe's eyes fell to the polished floor. "Only Miss Benton, myself, and Mr. Garrick possess keys." Poirot rose, pocketing the swab. He turned to examine the edge of the desk where the note had presumably been slipped beneath the door. The wooden surface bore faint impressions, a half-circle of smudged fingerprints and a scattered trace of ochre dust. Poirot crouched again, brushing aside a few grains with his cane tip. These ochre particles. Madam, do they remind you of any material in your collection? She thought a moment. My husband kept a cabinet of dried marigold petals he used for his tinctures. Many lie in small porcelain jars in the cabinet here. Precisely. Poirot's mustaches twitched. Our culprit has perhaps carried stray remnants from that cabinet, unconsciously betraying their path. He rose and proceeded to a tall glass-fronted cabinet containing botanical specimens, gently. He opened it and lifted a small jar labeled Taggart's officinalis. Inside lay brittle petals, but no dust on the outside. Poirot tapped the jar's rim and shook it lightly. A few granules escaped, tiny as St. Styr's. The particles matched those on the desk. He carried the jar over to a white sheet of paper and shook more gently, releasing a sprinkling of ochre dust. Then he sifted through his swabs, finding a fine sample of powder from the keyhole under his pocket microscope. The two samples were identical in hue and granularity. He smiled faintly. A botanical calling card. Lady Ashcombe shivered. So, the intruder visited the Marigold cabinet before planting the bookmark. Just so. Poirot placed the jar back, relocking the cabinet. He turned and took the marigold itself from the glass bowl on the reading table, under the magnifying lens of his pocket microscope. He observed the edges of each petal. Note these. Minute perforations uniform, as though made by a sewing needle rather than natural wear. The flower was pierced to secure it to the page, then removed and replaced precisely here. He laid the bloom alongside the note slip. And the paper, have you observed any watermark? Lady Ashcombe produced the note once more. Poirot held it up. This paper is remarkably fine. No watermark. But the hackle at the torn edge is clean machine-trimmed rather than hand-torn. He traced a fingertip along the fold. It comes from the Athenaeum Club's correspondence pad. Does it not? The fibers match the club's stationery. She nodded, astonished. Yes, but how could my adversary obtain it? Only the club's clerks and members use this paper. Poirot tucked the note into his coat. We shall inquire with the club secretary. For now, let us speak with those who had access to this room last night. He led her across the library to a tall bookshelf near the entrance. Miss Benton, your secretary. Would it be permissible to interview her here? Lady Ashcombe hesitated, then spoke crisply. Of course. She is in the adjacent morning room. She raised her voice. Clara, Monsieur Poirot wishes to speak with you. Moments later, Miss Clara Benton entered, a graceful woman in a tailored charcoal suit. Her auburn hair coiled neatly at the nape. She stood with polite deference a few paces into the library. Monsieur Poirot, she curtsied. I hope I may be of service. Poirot smiled warmly. Mademoiselle Benton, I thank you for your prompt attendance. I wish to ask you a few questions about last evening's events. He gestured toward the desk. Were you here after Mrs. Ashcombe retired? Clara laid a hand over her heart. I completed the day's correspondence until 10:30. Then I delivered the final letters to the butler, who locked the door after me. I returned to my quarters by 11. Did you place any correspondence beneath this door? Poirot's voice was gentle. She shook her head. No, monsieur. I would never mix personal matters with official club business. She glanced at the note. And that paper. I have seen it only here at the club. I would not have thought to bring it. Poirot inclined his head. Very well. One more question. Did you notice anything unusual in the Marigold cabinet as you passed? Clara's brow creased. Now that you mention it, monsieur, the cabinet seemed ajar this morning, though I was sure I closed it last night. I thought it merely slipped in the night. That slip betrayed our culprit. Poirot made a mental note. The cabinet, known only to a few, stood as a nexus of access. "Thank you. Mademoiselle Benton." She curtsied again and departed. Poirot crossed the room to the door where Mr. Garrick, the butler, stood in silent attendance, dark-suited and solemn. He offered a respectful nod. "Mr. Garrick, you secured this door each night." The butler's voice was measured. "Indeed, sir. At precisely 10. I ensure both locks engage. No one re-enters until morning, save for Miss Benton, who maintains a key." Poirot pressed on. "Did you notice any disturbance to the Marigold cabinet as you locked up?" Garrick's face remained impassive. "No, monsieur. I trusted the library would remain undisturbed." He paused. "Except for Lady Ashcombe's note placed beneath the door, as you observed." "And you delivered that note to Lady Ashcombe this morning?" Poirot followed. "Actually," Garrick admitted, "I found it on the mat and brought it into her morning room at 8. He looked away. It seemed urgent. Poirot's eyes gleamed. "So the note arrived at some time between 10 and 8. Yet the cabinets. Dust suggests the Marigold was placed last night, while the note waited until morning. A dual-phase insertion." He turned back to the reading table, assembling his observations. "Our first clues, then, are these: ochre dust from the Marigold cabinet on the desk and lock, the finely cut and machine-trimmed paper from the Athenaeum Club, and the two-phase delivery flower at night. Note by morning." He closed his eyes briefly. "Now, the question becomes, who among those with access possessed motive to deliver such a message, and skill to handle both botany and subterfuge?" He opened his eyes to meet Lady Ashcombe's worried gaze. "Madam, we have identified the means of intrusion, but not yet the hand behind it. Tomorrow, I shall visit the Athenaeum Club's clerk, inspect membership records for stationary access, and learn more of Lord Ashcombe's secret inquiries. Tonight, let us ponder these first clues, that we may approach the next step with clarity and purpose." As he swept his gaze over the silent shelves, the ancient tomes seemed to lean forward, eager to divulge their hidden knowledge, and in that watchful library, Poirot's little grey cells began their quiet rumination, piecing together a puzzle that spanned paper, petals, and the fragile memories of the heart. Chapter 3. The gathering of suspects the following morning. The sun rose pale over Bloomsbury, casting a gentle glow through the stained glass windows of Lady Ashcombe's library. Poirot arrived promptly, greeted by the soft rustle of pages and the faint fragrance of dried marigold that still lingered in the air. Today, his task was to gather those who had access to both the library and the Athenaeum Club's stationery, in order to narrow his field of suspects. Lady Ashcombe ushered him to a cluster of leather chairs near the hearth. "Monsieur Poirot, I have asked 3 individuals to meet with you at 10 o'clock, she explained quietly. "Her secretary, Miss Clara Benton, the butler, Mr. Garrick, and Dr. Algernon Crane, a noted botanist who had visited Lord Ashcombe on scholarly business just days before his death." Poirot inclined his head. "Excellent. One must examine not only means, but motive and opportunity. We shall question each in turn." At 10 sharp, Miss Benton entered, carrying a small notebook and her composed demeanour. She curtsied before taking the offered seat. Poirot began with courteous efficiency. "Mademoiselle, you know the routine of this library better than any. You delivered the final letters at 10 last night. Yet you held the club paper used for the note." He paused. "Tell me, do you recall lending that stationery to anyone?" Clara's brow furrowed. "Only to Lady Ashcombe, sir, when she corresponded with the club itself. I never thought to remove the pad. She tapped her fingers lightly on the notebook. I did. However, observe that Dr. Crane borrowed this very volume on Taggett's Angustifolia 2 evenings ago." He sent it back with a note requesting permission to examine a rare specimen in your greenhouses. Did he use any of this paper for his own correspondence? Poirot inquired. She shook her head. None. His notes were all on his personal stationery, cream-colored, embossed with his family crest. She produced a sample envelope from her pocket-book. Poirot examined it, noting the coarse grain. I verified the club's paper by its smooth finish and lack of watermark. Poirot nodded. Thank you. Mademoiselle, you may withdraw, as she departed. He added quietly to his mental ledger, Benton, no direct access to Clubpad, but aware of Crane's visits and greenhouse work. Next came the butler, Mr. Garrick, resplendent in tailcoat and white gloves. He bowed and awaited questions with impeccable restraint. Poirot motioned to the desk. You delivered the note to Lady Ashcombe at 8 this morning. Did you inspect it for any marks before presenting it? Garrick's calm voice carried weight. I noted no seal or identifiable script. Master Poirot, it appeared as a plain piece of folded club stationery likely slipped under the door during the night. He paused. I did, however, see Dr. Crane depart the library at 9:30, carrying a small packet. Poirot raised an eyebrow. The packet. What did it contain? Garrick hesitated. I assumed it was his own notes. He frequently carried botanical sketches. I did not examine it further. Did you witness anyone else entering the library after you locked it last night? Poirot pressed. Garrick's eyes remained steady. No one. Sir, at least not that I saw. The corridors were empty after 10, and the door was secure until morning, as Garrick bowed and left. Poirot made another note. Garrick saw Crane leaving late. No mention of club stationery. Locked door intact. The third guest, Dr. Crane, arrived with an apologetic smile and a satchel of botanist's tools. Tall and scholarly, with tweed jacket and pince-nez, he greeted Lady Ashcombe and Poirot. I apologize for intruding, but I heard news of your loss and thought my knowledge of Taggart's might assist. Poirot inclined his head. Your expertise is welcome, Dr. Crane. Perhaps you can shed light on the marigold's condition. He held up the pressed blossom. I noted tiny, uniform perforations made after drying. Could you explain their purpose? Crane examined the flower through his magnifier. Yes, those pinholes would allow the petals to lie flush when pressed, an old herbarium technique. I taught it to Lord Ashcombe during our joint research. He looked up. I alone have used a straight pin in that cabinet, but only to refile specimens from my studies. Poirot's mustaches twitched. You handle the greenhouse's specimens, but not this particular book's bloom. Crane shook his head. No, monsieur. That bloom came from my own packet, fresh from my greenhouse samples. He patted his satchel. I brought a livestock to compare under glass last night. I left it on this desk round 9:30, then retrieved it before departing. Did you use any of the club's stationery for your notes? Poirot asked. Crane smiled wryly. Never. My notes remain on my family's letterhead. I would not sully my records with club paper. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. And when you found the cabinet jar open this morning, what did you conclude? Merely that someone browsed the specimens after my departure, Crane replied. Perhaps a curious scholar or prankster. Not knowing of Lord Ashcombe's passing, as Crane withdrew, Poirot added to his record, Crane, unique botanical method, admitted late-night presence, denies use of club paper, with all three gone. Poirot motioned Lady Ashcombe to join him at the desk. He laid out the key facts: the ochre dust, the pinholed flower, the club paper, Garrick's sighting of Crane, carrying a packet, and Benton's awareness of both greenhouse work and stationary use. We have 3 individuals with access, yet none confessed to using the club paper or placing the bookmark. Poirot mused. One handled the bloom, another saw its removal, and a third learned of the cabinet's contents. He paused, then drew her attention to a small footprint on the carpet near the cabinet, barely perceptible, as though made by a slipper. Notice this, madam. The pattern matches your favorite embroidered slippers, not a servant's shoe. Someone wearing your own slippers could have moved unseen, planting the marigold with poetic flourish. Lady Ashcombe's eyes widened. My slippers. But I retired hours before the bloom appeared. Poirot's gaze was bright with revelation. Perhaps you retired, but someone vaulted your identity to elude notice. Our culprit borrowed a likeness of your routine. A borrowed key, borrowed slippers, a borrowed sentiment. We shall follow this thread further in the greenhouses and within your private apartments. He closed his notebook. For now, consider these gathered suspects and their whispered secrets. Tomorrow, we shall inspect the club records for unusual stationery requests and visit your apartments to seek the missing slippers. The web grows finer, but our quarry remains within its bounds. Lady Ashcombe inclined her head, hope mingling with lingering dread. As Poirot turned to survey the silent shelves, the little grey cells began their next cycle, seeking the hidden hand that wove this marigold puzzle through borrowed guise and botanical artistry. Chapter 4. The Club and the Slippers. That afternoon, Hercule Poirot journeyed across the mist-kissed streets to the Athenaeum Club, its heavy oak doors guarded by sober doormen in midnight livery inside. The vaulted foyer smelled of polished wood and pipe tobacco. Poirot presented himself to the club secretary, Mr. Edward Fenwick, a slender man with steel-rimmed spectacles and a careful air of propriety. Monsieur Poirot, Fenwick intoned, an honour, as always. He led Poirot through hushed corridors to the records room, where clerks catalogued ledgers by yellow lamplight. Poirot observed the walls lined with minute pigeonholes, each letter slice tagged to a member's name. Mr. Fenwick, Poirot began, removing the mysterious slip of stationery from his coat. I have reason to believe this paper originates from your club's correspondence pad. I should like to review the log of pad issuances for Lady Ashcombe and any special orders placed in the past fortnight. Fenwick opened a heavy ledger. Let us see. Lady Ashcombe's usual allotment is 1 pad per quarter. However, he frowned. On the evening of October 12th, his second pad was issued to her account at precisely 9:30. Thank you, Poirot said, his eyes bright. And who requested it? Fenwick consulted the adjacent register. It is initialed M.W., likely Miss Winifred, though her secretary normally signs such requests. The pad was delivered by a messenger to your library door. Poirot's moustaches quivered, and no notation of any other member using her pad. Fenwick shook his head. No. I have cross-checked the usage, monsieur. That second pad is unaccounted for beyond your slip. 'Tis been. Poirot replaced the slip and closed the ledger. One more question. Do you still have the remnants of that pad? Yes. Fenwick retrieved a small box of trim stubs. He handed Poirot the very stub bearing the identical machine-cut edge. This was the final stub before that special issuance. Poirot examined its serrated top. And here, he said, holding it beside the slip's torn edge, we see the match, an exact fit. He nodded thoughtfully. Our perpetrator secured club stationery and signed at 9:30 on the 12th, precisely when Dr. Crane claimed to retrieve his packet, and well before the flower appeared. Fenwick offered a courteous bow. I trust this aids your inquiry, Monsieur Poirot. It does indeed. Poirot returned the stub. Merci. He rose, adjusting his bowler, and departed the club, his little grey cells already turning to the next phase. Back in the saffron light of Lady Ashcombe's library, Poirot paused at the hearth, where the glow of dying embers still lingered. Lady Ashcombe entered, her expression anxious. Have you learnt anything of the stationery? Madam, the pad was issued under your name and signed simply N.W. at 9:30 p.m. On the night in question, whoever signed for that pad expected to remain unnoticed in your quarters. Poirot laid the stub and slip side by side. This confirms a deliberate deception, using your club membership. Lady Ashcombe's shoulders sagged. My secretary, Clara Benton, would never risk misusing my name. Dr. Crane's own notes are on his stationery. Then, there's the initials M.W. Poirot's eyes gleamed. That belongs to Miss Margaret Wilkes, junior clerk at the club and an acquaintance of Miss Benton's, if our reports are correct. My maid, Lady Ashcombe gasped. She sometimes sits in the servants' gallery when I dictate letters, precisely. Poirot said, we must examine her lodgings and, as planned, your own dressing-room. He paused, noting the faintest tremor in Lady Ashcombe's chin. There is, madam, one final detail to clarify, the slippers. They ascended the grand staircase to Lady Ashcombe's private apartments. At the landing, Poirot paused before a low mahogany bench, its tufted cushion showing the imprint of slippers long silent. He pointed, Here, madam, one of your embroidered house slippers once rested. If our intruder imitated your evening routine, they would need your slippers to pad softly about. Lady Ashcombe approached and knelt by a wardrobe. She opened it, revealing rows of shoes and only one slipper remaining. The matching slipper is gone, she murmured. I thought it misplaced. But now, her voice trailed off. Poirot removed a handkerchief and examined the sole of the remaining slipper. The velvet had a faint smudge of ochre dust matching, but found in the cabinet and on the library floor. Our suspect wore your slipper, Poirot pronounced softly, and then removed it, perhaps to avoid leaving a second print. He stepped outdoors to the small slate terrace outside her window, where the ground was softened by recent rain. There, beneath the sill, lay a single footprint pressed deeply into wet earth bearing the pattern of a delicate floral embroidery. Poirot knelt, brushing aside mud to reveal a partial sole ornament, the same design as Lady Ashcombe's remaining slipper. Only one pair of slippers bears this embroidery, he said, standing and brushing his lapels. We now have 3 strands of evidence: club stationery misappropriation by M.W., the mould marigold technique taught by Lord Ashcombe to Dr. Crane, and a single slipper borrowed and discarded. Lady Ashcombe covered her face. My maid, my poor Clara. Poirot nodded gently. The human heart, madam, weaves motives in unexpected patterns. We shall question Miss Wilkes and Miss Benton as well, to learn of their acquaintance, but tomorrow's dawn will bring confessions clearer than any riddle. He offered his arm. Let us have tea, madam, and prepare our minds for the final unravelling. For the threads we hold are close to completion, and soon the full tapestry of deception will reveal its design. As they descended the staircase, Poirot's little grey cells hummed with anticipation, eager to witness the moment when borrowed slippers and stolen paper would guide him to the culprit's door. Chapter 5. Initial Interrogation. Smalllight filtered through the lace curtains of Lady Ashcombe's maid. Miss Margaret Wilkes's lodgings, a modest attic room on the Cromwell Place mews. Hercule Poirot and Inspector Davis stood just inside the door, their presence announced by a polite knock. Wilkes, pale and trembling, ushered them in with quivering hands. Her uniform lay draped over a chair, slippers discarded beneath the bed. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector, she murmured, voice barely above a whisper. I did not expect to see you so soon. Poirot regarded her gently. Mademoiselle Wilkes, we have learned that your initials and W appear on the club pad slip signed at 9:30 on the night of Lady Ashcombe's distress. We also know your mistress's slipper was worn and cast aside near her window. He gestured toward the single slipper displayed carefully on a small table. "Will you explain how the pad and the slipper came into your possession?" Wilkes's breath caught. She glared first at the slipper, then at the slip of paper. I borrowed the pad," she admitted, voice quavering. "Clara Miss Benton told me that Lady Ashcombe wished to send a note of condolence to a club. Colleague, that evening she asked me to fetch the pad from the Athenaeum, as her secretary had left early. I signed the slip and W as instructed, and left the pad in Lady Ashcombe's dressing room." Poirot's mustaches twitched, and the slippers. Wilkes stifled a sob. "When I entered Lady Ashcombe's dressing room to leave the pad, I saw her slipper by the wardrobe, and the other missing. I feared I was discovered and thought to cover my tracks. I slipped into her slipper to leave the room silently, then removed it at the window so no indentations would reveal foreign footsteps. She sank onto the edge of her bed. I was frightened. And I did not mean any harm." Inspector Davis noted her trembling. "Why the fear? Miss Wilkes, what did you hope to conceal?" Wilkes pressed her hands to her face. "I knew of Lady Ashcombe's sorrow at her husband's death. I thought she wished to send kind words, and I feared that, if I left prints in the library, she might suspect burglary or worse, so I staged nothing but my own misstep." Poirot folded his hands. "Your admission explains the pad and slipper. Yet does it account for the marigold pressed in the book and the cryptic note about remembrance?" Wilkes shook her head. "No. Monsieur, I had nothing to do with the flower or the message. I returned to my quarters immediately and did not visit the library again." Poirot nodded. "Your honesty is appreciated. Mademoiselle, you may rest assured that these matters will be clarified." He rose and nodded to Davis, who escorted Wilkes to the door. Next, Poirot and Davis proceeded to the sunny morning room where Miss Clara Benton awaited, her features drawn with concern. "Mademoiselle Benton," Poirot began calmly. "Miss Wilkes confessed borrowing the pad at your direction. Pray tell, why would you send your colleague to fetch club stationery at 9:30? Clara's lips trembled. Lady Ashcombe asked for it. She spoke of a private note to a friend. She did not specify who. I was unwell and left early, so I requested Miss Wilkes to collect it. Very well, Poirot said, his tone encouraging. And after Miss Wilkes returned, did you inspect this note? He held up the slip. Clara gasped. I know. It must have been placed directly beneath Lady Ashcombe's door without my knowledge. Yet you were nearby, Poirot observed. Did you see anyone enter or exit the library after you locked it? She swallowed. No one, as far as I recall. I retired at 10:30. The doors were secure thereafter. Poirot studied her. And the Marigold itself, did you observe any specimen out of place in the herbarium cabinet? Clara hesitated. I thought I saw the cabinet slightly ajar when I passed that way this morning. I closed it firmly, assuming the door had not latched properly. Her voice quavered. Monsieur Poirot, I did not witness the marigold being placed, but I did collect a fresh blossom from Lady Ashcombe's greenhouse that afternoon. It was to be pressed for her late husband's biography project. Could that have... Poirot's eyes narrowed thoughtfully. Miss Benton, the marigold in question was fresh and then pressed with pinholes. If you brought that blossom, you could have slipped it into the book unnoticed. Yet the note's paper and the borrowed slipper suggest another. Clara's lips pressed tight. I would never conspire beyond my duty. Poirot nodded. I believe you acted only under Lady Ashcombe's request. Yet your greenhouse visit adds a potential explanation for the bloom's provenance. We shall need to inspect your cutting and pressing techniques. He stood. Thank you. Mademoiselle, that will be all for now. As Clara curtsied and withdrew, Poirot turned to Davis. Miss Wilkes and Miss Benton both acted to aid their mistress, yet neither controlled the botanical insertion nor composed the note. Our suspect remains at large, emerging into the crisp autumn air. Poirot and Davis made their way to Lady Ashcombe's conservatory, a structure of glass and iron, where exotic specimens thrived. The scent of damp earth and floral decay hung in the air. Poirot studied the rows of Taggart's officinales, their autumnal blooms curling toward the waning sun. He paused by a central table where Lady Ashcombe often worked. Consider the blossoms. Journey, Poirot mused. Our perpetrator borrowed the pad, wore the slipper, planted the flower, and left the note. But the blossom itself could only have been fresh that day, requiring access to a greenhouse. He plucked a single marigold, bloom vibrant golden petals edged in russet. Note its fragrance earthy, slightly bitter. Now see the cabinet specimen. He pointed to the dried petals in the study jar, stale, stiff, lacking this vivacity. Therefore, the culprit must have retrieved a live blossom, then pressed it quickly using the techniques taught by Dr. Crane. He turned to the botanist's tray. Crane's pinhole method is exactly the one used on the bookmark that leaves him as prime suspect for handling this specimen. Inspector Davis frowned. Yet Crane denied using club paper and slippers. True, Poirot replied, plucking a petal and scenting his fingers. But one could borrow stationery and slippers, while believing his own methods safe from detection. Our cat burglar of sentiment may be bold enough to blend Dr. Crane's botanical skill with a borrowed guise. He placed the bloom on the table. Tomorrow, we confront Dr. Crane with the fact that the marigold came from the greenhouse hereand. Only someone combining botanical expertise with clandestine artistry could execute both flower and note. Poirot tapped the pad slip and the slipper. Our evidence is converging. Soon, the final revelation will blossom from these gathered clues as they departed the greenhouse. The marigold's golden hue lingered in Poirot's memory living, testament to a message meant to honor, but twisted by fear and deception. And in the quiet play of autumn light, the stage was set for the next act in this floral mystery. Chapter 6. The first false lead late that afternoon. Hercule Poirot and Inspector Davis reconvened in the library, their minds swirling with the evidence gathered. The borrowed club stationery, the discarded slipper, the greenhouse marigold, and the pinhole petals. Both men were convinced Dr. Crane's botanical expertise and late-night presence made him the most likely suspect. They resolved to question him one final time, this time at his own laboratory at the Natural History Institute in Bloomsbury. The institute's corridors hummed with clerks and cataloguers as Poirot and Davis ascended a staircase to Crane's study. The door stood ajar, and inside, Dr. Algernon Crane bent over his work table, surrounded by glastrariums and pressed specimens. At his side lay the leather satchel he had carried to Lady Ashcombe's library. Crane looked up, his pince-nez catching the gaslight. Monsieur Poirot, Inspector, do come in. I was examining these Taggart samples. Poirot bowed slightly. Dr. Crane, we have revisited the evidence. Your late-night visit to Lady Ashcombe's greenhouse and your mastery of the marigold pressing technique seem to point conclusively to you. He tapped the neatly pressed specimen laid on the desk. Yet something tells me this is merely a false lead. Crane's lip quivered. I assure you, monsieur, I retrieved that blossom at Lady Ashcombe's request to compare live and dried petals from my publication. I performed the pinhole method to preserve its qualities for a microscopic study exactly as I taught Lord Ashcombe. It was only academic. Inspector Davis interjected, but you also signed for the stationery. Poirot shook his head. No, that was Miss Wilkes's doing. We have learned that Miss Benton dispatched her to fetch the pad. and the slipper was borrowed by Miss Wilkes to mask her own footsteps. He laid the slipper on the table. Your involvement was botanical and innocent. Crane's shoulders sagged in relief. Then Poirot turned to a shelf of paper samples. He held aloft the club pad stub. Our culprit needed the hollow template of MW to mask identity. Yet once that pad was in Wilkes's hands, the strategy belonged to someone else, someone who could direct both maid and secretary without rousing suspicion. Crane stepped back, alarmed. You think someone manipulated us all? Exactly. Poirot replied. The Marigold's true origin lies not here, but in a more private collection, one known only to Lady Ashcombe and her late husband. The dryer cabinet that yielded that blossom is separate from the greenhouse. He paused, letting the comment settle. Dr. Crane, your cabinet of dried specimens did not contain that Taggart's. Only the study jar in the library held dried marigold. Yet the culprit used a fresh bloom. This suggests they avoided your well-known herbarium technique and instead retrieved a fresh flower for a more vivid impression. Crane frowned. Then, the real Marigold culprit did not seek to mimic my method, but to use fresh petals, and yet they employed my pinhole pressing. Poirot smiled thinly. A clever fusion of fresh blossom with your taught method. The hand that pressed it knew both the drying cabinet and your technique. That hand belongs to one who studied under Lord Ashcombe, who had full access to both fresh and dried specimens, and your instruction. Do you know who that might be? Crane's face paled. Only Clara Benton. She often assisted me cataloguing samples after I demonstrated my techniques in the conservatory. Poirot nodded, and she would know precisely how to apply your pinhole method to fresh marigold. Miss Benton's involvement explains the botanical precision, but does not explain the ownership of the clue. The pad or the slipper, that requires a second accomplice. Inspector Davis frowned. So we have a duo, one to supply the bloom, another to stave the misdirection. Poirot said. Miss Benton provided the floral artistry. Miss Wilkes executed the pad signing and the slipper gambit together. They orchestrated this puzzle, each leveraging their duties and trust. Crane rubbed his brow. But why? What motive could these two young women share to torment Lady Ashcombe with a cryptic remembrance? Poirot's eyes glinted. Poor Memoir Lady Ashcombe's husband once promised to include their names in a forthcoming dedication of the Botanist's Almanac. Yet on his deathbed he said nothing. A whisper among staff claimed he removed the dedication at the last moment, deeming it improper. Miss Benton, devoted to preserving his academic legacy, and Miss Wilkes, loyal to her mistresses, wished to honor her husband. Combined efforts to force a remembrance. Crane's shoulders dropped. They sought justice for a forgotten footnote. Poirot inclined his head. Precisely a misguided tribute turned into a veiled accusation. They placed the marigold as a symbol of remembrance, then cloaked it in enigma to compel Lady Ashcombe to commission the dedication. Posthumously, Inspector Davis tapped his notebook, a first false lead, indeed pointing to Crane, whose methods they co-opted. Shall we confront the two together? Not yet, Poirot advised. We must allow them one final chance to untangle their motives and confess. I propose we assemble them in the library this evening, under the pretext of reviewing the almanac manuscript. There we shall reveal our understanding of their partnership, and observe their reactions. Crane nodded. I will assist by providing the manuscript and samples, so the scene appears natural. Poirot smiled. Excellent. By setting our stage thoughtfully, we compel truth to reveal itself. The first false lead has served its purpose. Now we proceed to the true unmasking. As they departed Crane's study, the afternoon light shifted toward evening. In the hush of the Institute, the veil of deception had begun to lift, guided by Poirot's steady intellect. Tomorrow's gathering would draw out the final confession, and the puzzle of the Marigold Bookmark would at last find its resolution. Chapter 7. The Psychological Gamethity. Evening, Lady Ushcombe's library glowed with the warm light of oil lamps as Hercule Poirot ranged his subtle stage. The great mahogany table bore the first edition of the Botanist's Almanac, open to page 312. Beside it lay fresh marigold petals, the tiny pinholes visible in their amber fragility, and the club pad slip and lone slipper staged as if under casual discussion. Inspector Davis stood by the doorway, ready to observe, one by one, Poirot's three principal suspects entered. Miss Clara Benton, the secretary whose botanical zeal had provided the pressing technique; Miss Margaret Wilkes, the maid whose borrowed pad and slipper had staged the misdirection; and Dr. Algernon Crane, the botanist whose instruction had unwittingly lent authenticity. Lady Ushcombe herself, resolute yet anxious, occupied an armchair to one side. The four took their places round the table. Poirot began softly. "Zamas, we have pursued evidence of means and opportunity, and even unravelled the first false lead. Tonight, I invite you into the train of the mind, that we may discover what mere facts cannot reveal." He gestured to the marigold petals. "Tell me, Miss Benton, when you demonstrated the pinhole pressing to Lord Ushcombe, what did you observe in his expression?" Clara's eyes flickered. He was intrigued. He said it preserved the flower's essence most faithfully. She inhaled sharply. "I simply wished to honor his interest." Poirot nodded. "And yet you chose to apply that method to a fresh bloom, rather than using dried specimens as you normally would." He paused to let the implication sink in. Clara's fingers trembled as she smoothed her skirt necks. Poirot turned to Wilkes. "Miss Wilkes, you borrowed your mistress's slipper to avoid detection, an ingenious tactic. Yet what prompted such desperation? Was it fear for your mistress's reputation, or fear for your own position?" Wilkes's lips quivered. I feared my own negligence would cast suspicion on the household. I only wished to protect Lady Ushcombe." Her voice cracked. "I never meant to cause scandal." Poirot's dark eyes were sympathetic but probing. Fear can lead us to unexpected lengths. Yet the note accompanying the marigold spoke of remembrance. The marigold remembers what the heart forgets. Who planted that sentiment in your hearts? He swept his gaze to Crane. Dr. Crane shifted. "Monsieur Poirot, if you suspect my involvement, I assure you my part was limited to botanical instruction. I saw no note, nor did I witness the insertion of fresh petals." Poirot smiled gently. "Quite so. Yet you provided the key to their artistry. Clara, you learned your technique from him. Margaret, you collected the bloom from the greenhouse together. You shared both knowledge and motive to secure a dedication Lord Ushcombe removed from the almanac." Clara's posture stiffened. "Dedication? That was his decision. Not ours. We only sought to remind Lady Ushcombe of his promise." Poirot leaned forward. "And how best to remind her?" "By placing a symbol of remembrance in his cherished volume, forcing her to commission the dedication posthumously." He tapped the table. "But one curiosity remains, the club stationery and the borrowed slipper. These belong to Lady Ushcombe. How did you expect her to receive your symbolic reproach?" Wilkes's eyes filled with tears. "We thought the drama would jolt her memory, her sorrow, and her promise to the almanac." She clasped hands. "We meant justice, not pain." Poirot paused, then set down the marigold petals. "Justice served late can appear as vengeance. You underestimated the emotional toll. Yet there is one final test." He produced the club pad slip. "Miss Wilkes, why did you delay leaving this note until the morning, rather than delivering it with the marigold?" Wilkes swallowed. "I feared Lady Ushcombe would see it and destroy the marigold immediately, by waiting until dawn. She would find the symbol of remembrance before she could remove it, an artful stratagem, Poirot acknowledged. He then addressed Clara. "Mademoiselle Benton, you instructed Margaret to secure the pad and the slipper, yet you produced no handwriting. On the note itself, why leave that to her hand?" Clara bowed her head. I did not wish my own writing to betray my involvement. Margaret's hand would seem accidental." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "And you, Doctor, did you realize your botanical tuition would be co-opted for such psychological strategy?" Crane's voice was low. "I regret that my lessons were used thus. I should have foreseen how the technique could carry a message beyond simple preservation." Poirot rose, clasping his hands. "We see now how each of you, under the guise of devotion, wove this intricate puzzle-borrowing master's tools, your mistress's illusions, and my botanical instructions to compel a promise unfulfilled. Yet the true heart of this puzzle lies not in technical skill, but in the strings of remorse and the search for closure." He surveyed them. "The question now is, will you accept that your attempt to rekindle a promise became a betrayal of trust, or will your collective guilt continue to haunt the halls of Bloomsbury?" A heavy silence followed. Clara pressed her lips together, tears in her eyes. Wilkes bowed her head, shoulders shaking. Crane exhaled, remorse etched on his face. Lady Ashcombe rose, her dignified composure softened by compassion. She stepped to the table, gathering the petals and the note. "I see now why you acted," she said quietly. "But promise me that henceforth all dedications and memories will be shared openly, without shadows." Clara and Wilkes exchanged a glance and then nodded. "We apologize." "Lady Ashcombe," they whispered in unison. Poirot inclined his head. "Then the psychological game is complete. Truth has emerged from artifice, and remorse has triumphed over secrecy. Tomorrow we shall finalize the dedication and close the book on this affair both literally and figuratively, as the lanterns glowed warmly round them. Poirot's little grey cells settled into calm, having navigated the human heart's labyrinth to reveal its hidden passages. And in the hush of that autumn evening, the library returned to its gentle vigil over memory and promise. Chapter 8. A secondary mystery following morning. Lady Ashcombe arrived at her library with a sense of relief, believing the strange affair of the Marigold Bookmark laid to rest. Yet when she stepped into the room, her face blanched. The first edition of the Botanist's Almanac lay open on her desk, its pages ruffled, and the new dedication page composed by Dr. Crane and approved by Lady Ashcombe had vanished. In its place stood a single, freshly pressed violet, its petals dark with dew, resting atop the gilt-edged margin between pages 311 and 312. Poirot and Inspector Davis were summoned at once. Poirot entered, keen eyes noting the violet's 5 delicate petals, each bearing a tiny horizontal crease. He lifted the bloom carefully with tweezers, a most curious development. He murmured, "A secondary mystery. Msamas, Lady." Ashcombe swallowed. "Only yesterday we agreed that the dedication would be bound into the almanac. This morning the manuscript is gone and this violet appears instead. What could it imply?" Inspector Davis crouched to examine the shelf beneath the desk, where stray paper fragments lay. He retrieved a scrap bearing part of the heading dedication. "To Lady Winifred Ashcombe, torn cleanly at its edges. Our dedication page has been removed after binding. Monsieur, the culprit tore it from the binding before stealing it." Poirot inclined his head, examining the torn edge. "Observe the clean cut likely with the same botanical knife employed earlier. And this violet." He held it aloft beneath the lamp. "Symbol of remembrance, yes, but darker in hue, suggesting sorrow rather than gold-hued gratitude." He placed the violet beside the marigold petals in the crystal bowl. "Yesterday's plea for remembrance has been subverted. a new message of regret and perhaps warning. He turned to Lady Ashcombe. Who among our circle values the freshly bound dedication most fiercely and could resent its insertion into this venerable volume? Lady Ashcombe frowned. My secretary, Miss Benton, and my maid, Miss Wilkes, both cherished Lord Ashcombe's promise of dedication. Dr. Crane helped craft it, yet all three confessed their parts and pledged to honor it. Poirot nodded. Precisely why one of them or another might wish to replace the dedication with a darker symbol. Let us retrace the steps of binding. He moved to the glass-fronted cabinet, where Crane's earlier manuscript lay. The leather satchel was open, its compartments empty. The manuscript disappeared overnight. Our miscreant must have visited the library after our gathering. Inspector Davis tapped his notebook. Miss Benton had the greatest technical skill with manuscripts. She transcribed Lady Ashcombe's corrections. She also has her own flower-dusted Valentine's press in her quarters. Poirot turned to Clara Benton. Summoned on the spot, she entered, her face drawn. Monsieur, I swear I secured the manuscript in the binding room after Lady Ashcombe's review. Poirot held up the torn dedication scrap. Yet this fragment suggests the dedication was excised after binding. Tell me, mademoiselle, did you notice any unusual activity in the binding room or evidence of forced entry? Clara shook her head. No, monsieur, the binding room doors were locked, as always, and I held the only key. I must have mislaid it for a moment, but by the time I returned, the dedication was set in place. Indeed, Poirot's mustaches twitched. He stepped to the fireplace mantel. Among the decorative vases stood a small glass container of violet-pressed specimens for a perfume trial by Dr. Crane. One violet, now gone, bore the same 5-petal shape as the bloom on the desk. Dr. Crane, these violets were part of your study. Crane, summoned again, approached. He regarded the crushed violet in Poirot's tweezers. I see my trial flower here. I can't imagine how it migrated from my conservatory to the library. Poirot's gaze turned to the single boot print impressed in the velvet carpet near the sequencing presser print, bearing the same floral sole pattern as Lady Ashcombe's remaining slipper. And here, once more, the borrowed slipper marks the path. Miss Wilkes, you alone wear such slippers. Margaret Wilkes, standing near the doorway, stifled a gasp. I borrowed them to fetch Lady Ashcombe's shawl from the dressing room last night. I left them there and did not return. Poirot studied her, then spoke gently. A convincing explanation. Yet the violet's presence points to someone familiar with both botanical specimens and the binding process. Miss Benton, you pressed the violets in your porcelain press. Do you recall how many remained? Clara's face went ashen. Only 9. Is missing. Poirot nodded. Then our perpetrator took that one and carried it here, after accessing the binding room, likely under a borrowed disguise of slippers, and perhaps using Miss Wilkes's pad method. He spread his fingers in reflection. But who could re-enter so stealthily after all doors were secured? Lady Ashcombe set her jaw. Miss Wilkes's key. And mine, I lent her the house key so she could lock up downstairs if she left the binding room. Key unattended. Poirot held up a finger. Precisely. The lock to the binding room is identical to the library's yesterday's slipper. Gambit applied again. Our culprit is the same duo, Clara and Margaret. Yet this time, one acted alone, substituting the dedication with an emblem of sorrow. Which of you harbored the deeper regret? Clara lowered her eyes. Margaret's lip quivered. The two exchanged a glance fraught with unspoken emotion. Poirot closed the almanac gently. Mademoiselles, I shall allow you to choose who among you will confess this secondary act. The violet, like the marigold before it, bears the weight of memory, and only through acknowledgment can that weight be lifted. He stepped back, nodding to Inspector Davis, who closed his notebook. The library's hush deepened as Clara and Margaret stood before the evidence, the torn dedication scrap, the violet petals, and the silent testimony of the pressed florals. Their hearts beat with the cadence of remembrance and the promise that, once more, truth would bloom from sorrow's shadow. Chapter 9. Hidden Connections. Late that morning, Hercule Poirot convened the four principal players in Lady Ashcombe's drawing room. Its high windows opened to the gentle autumn air. On a small table before them lay the two emblematic blossoms, the golden marigold and the dew-dark violet, alongside the torn dedication scroll. And the borrowed slipper. Each item bore witness to successive deceptions. Poirot steepled his fingers and regarded his guests. Miss Clara Benton, whose skill with Flora had taught the pinhole technique. Miss Margaret Wilkes, whose borrowed pad and slipper had set the stage. Dr. Algernon Crane, whose botanical guidance had lent authenticity. And Lady Winifred Ashcombe, whose grief and promise lay at the heart of it all. Mesdames et messieurs, Poirot began in his gentle Belgian accent. We have seen how individual threads of evidence wove their separate tales, yet it is the hidden connections between you that reveal the pattern behind the deception. He produced a large sheet of parchment and drew for names in quadrants: Benton, Wilkes, Crane, and Ashcombe. Then he began to draw lines linking them. First, Poirot said, sketching a line between Benton and Crane, "You, Miss Benton, learned the pinhole pressing method from Dr. Crane himself. Your mutual engagement with botanical preservation created the first bridge. Without Dr. Crane's instruction, the marigold and later the violet would not have borne such precise perforations." He paused to let them recall the instruction sessions in the conservatory. Next, he linked Wilkes to Ashcombe. Miss Wilkes, your loyalty to Lady Ashcombe was personal and deep. You saw her manage grief with dignity and feared any hint of scandal. You borrowed her slipper and pad not to harm, but to shield her from suspicion. He tapped the slipper on the table. Your connection was one of servant to mistress, yet carried the weight of friendship. Poirot then connected Crane to Ashcombe. Dr. Crane and Lady Ashcombe shared academic respect. He visited to discuss dedication language, and she trusted his botanical insight in crafting the dedication page. Their link was one of intellect and remembrance until the stolen dedication replaced promise with sorrow. Finally, he drew a bold line between Benton and Wilkes. But the strongest connection lies between you two. Clara, you enlisted Margaret to fetch the pad and wear the slipper, sharing your knowledge of both stationery and concealment. Margaret, you relied on Clara's botanical skill to plant the marigold and later the violet to honor a promise you both felt was unjustly withdrawn. Poirot folded his hands. Thus, the deception was not hatched by a single mind, but by a partnership forged in loyalty, respect, and mutual secrecy between your roles. You orchestrated the call for a remembrance, the staging of the secondary reproach, and the final substitution of sorrow for dedication. Miss Benton's eyes brimmed with tears. Miss Wilkes's lip quivered. They exchanged a glance that spoke of shared remorse. Lady Ashcombe rose from her chair, voice quavering with compassion. I see now that your actions, though misguided, sprang from devotion to my late husband's memory and to my own peace. She gestured to the blossoms. Can you explain why you moved from golden marigold to violet? From call for remembrance to symbol of sorrow, Clara swallowed. I feared the marigold had forced your hand too brashly. Madam, your grief was still fresh. So I suggested the violet a subtler, more melancholic bloom to temper our reminder with gentler sorrow, hoping you would preserve the dedication with due respect. She bowed her head. I acted to protect both you and our initial intent. Margaret added softly, I carried out Clara's plan, using my pad slip and your slipper, Madam, to give voice to that sorrow without revealing our identities. I never wished you harm, only to see justice done for a promise I believed your husband made in earnest." Dr. Crane stepped forward. "I regret that my instruction lent such power to your tribute. I intended only botanical collaboration, not theatrical rebukes." He looked at Lady Ashcombe. "Please know my heart was never in this deception." Lady Ashcombe approached the table and gently gathered the blossoms. "Your bonds of loyalty to me and to my husband's memory have led you astray. Yet in revealing these hidden connections, you also reveal your true intent to honor, not to injure." She laid both petals side by side. "Let these symbols return to their rightful meanings. Marigold for remembrance, violet for sorrow, and may both find a proper place in the dedication untainted by secrecy." Poirot closed the almanac with careful hands. "The hidden connections have been laid bare. No more false leads remain, only the final act of restoration." He looked at Clara and Margaret. "Now that the tapestry of your partnership is exposed, there can be no further misdirection. The dedication page shall be bound anew, and your intentions, once cloaked, will at dust stand in open light." As the four stood in solemn accord, the autumn sunlight shimmered through the windows, illuminating the room's rich wood and gilded spines. The hidden connections, once obscured in the shadows of secrecy, now guided the way to true remembrance and the promise that, even in sorrow, honesty would prevail. Chapter 10. Poirot's secret collate that afternoon. The library lay in hushed anticipation. The guests from the previous gathering, Lady Ashcombe, Miss Benton, Miss Wilkes, and Dr. Crane, watched as Hercule Poirot approached the first edition of the Botanist's Almanac. Placed open once more at page 312, beside it sat the freshly printed dedication page, now safely bound, and a single violet in a crystal vase. Poirot's keen gaze rested on the book's margin, where he had earlier found no note until today. "Mesdames et messieurs," Poirot began, voice calm, "before we conclude this affair, there remains one subtle clue that has evaded even our careful scrutiny." He produced a slender magnifying glass and held it to the margin beside the text on Taggart's angustifolia. There, in the author's own faint hand, appeared a small pencil notation, CYP- for a tense, barely visible beneath the gilt edging. Lady Ashcombe leaned forward, frowning. "CYP? What could that signify?" Poirot lowered the glass. "Lady Ashcombe, your late husband was not only a collector of botanical lore, but also a member of the Cryptogamic and Yeast Preservation Society, commonly abbreviated CYPS. His entries often bore marginal codes to denote specimens acquired on specific dates. The notation here indicates he collected that marigold ore. It's ilk on the 4th of October. Double quotes. Dr. Crane's eyes widened. "But the first marigold appeared fluttering in this book only days ago, long after the 4th. How could your husband have placed it himself?" Poirot smiled gently. "He did not. The crucial detail is that the 3rd through 5th specimens in his collection were labeled identically. This exact species blooms for only a fortnight each autumn. The culprit, in selecting the marigold, unwittingly chose October 4th as a cipher to echo your husband's own code, hoping to suggest his hand from beyond the grave." Miss Benton's fingers drummed on the table. "So the code was meant as an homage and a deception?" "Precisely," Poirot replied. He tapped the small pencil mark. "Thus our secret clue. Only one person among us possessed both the knowledge of Lord Ashcombe's cryptic annotations and access to the original specimen records. That person is you, Miss Benton." Clara's face paled. "But I only learned of the code when I transcribed his notes last month. I did not think to use it." Poirot's eyes were gentle. "Yet you did. In orchestrating the marigold's insertion, you borrowed not only Dr. Crane's method and Miss Wilkes's slipper, but also your master's own cipher-choosing for tense, as a poetic reference to his 4th October collection, signaling remembrance rather than reproach. Miss Wilkes gasped. Clara, her voice trembled. You knew of the code. Clara swallowed. He taught me once, in confidence, while demonstrating his indexing system. I never meant to implicate him. I thought the code would lend authenticity to our plea. For the dedication, Dr. Crane stepped forward, and then you used the same code in the violet placement. Poirot nodded. Look again at the violet's single dewdrop, positioned at the petal that aligns with the 4 o'clock position. When the bloom faces up, a silent echo of the date and code. Lady Ashcombe covered her mouth. Oh, Clara. Poirot folded his hands. The secret clue reveals that the central rule in this symphony of remembrance belonged to you. Mademoiselle Benton, your devotion to all that Lord Ashcombe held dear guided every step from botanical technique to cryptic homage. Yet it also ensnared you in a web of unintended betrayal. Clara bowed her head, tears sliding free. I thought such subtlety would ensure my husband's promise was kept. But I see now how I wove too complex a pattern and led us all astray. Poirot offered her a comforting smile. Your tribute was born of affection and respect, the lesson. Here is that even the finest code can wound when deployed without consent. But now that the secret is revealed, the path to true remembrance is clear. He closed the book carefully. Let us bind this edition with both dedication and marginal note honoring Lord Ashcombe's cipher, openly, that future readers may understand its meaning without mystery. Turning to Lady Ashcombe, he added, Madam, your late husband's spirit will rest more peacefully now that his code is restored to its rightful context. As the group moved to finalize the binding and place the violet beside the newly inscribed dedication, the library's atmosphere warmed with reconciliation. Poirot's little grey cells, having uncovered the secret clue, now allowed hearts once entangled in secrecy to breathe freely, proof that even the most hidden cipher yields to gentle illumination. Chapter 11. Tensions rose of late afternoon. Sun slanted through the tall windows of Lady Ashcombe's library, casting warm streaks across the worn Persian carpets and the tidy stack of freshly bound volumes on the central table. Only moments had passed since Poirot's revelation of the secret cipher, yet an uneasy tension now pulsed beneath the room's polite calm. Miss Clara Benton sat stiffly in an armchair, her fingers still trembling from the admission of her role. Across from her, Miss Margaret Wilkes bit her lip as she paced a narrow path beside the bookcases. Dr. Crane hovered near the fireplace, his pince-nez dangling from one ear, while Lady Ashcombe watched each of them with a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. Poirot stood behind the table, hands clasped behind his back. Mesdames, monsieur, he began quietly, we have unearthed the secret clue that guided our deception, yet the human heart is seldom satisfied by mere truth alone. Emotions stirred by grief and loyalty often linger in the shadows, yearning for resolution. He tapped the newly inscribed dedication page. Now that we have restored Lord Ashcombe's cipher, I invite you to share what remains unspoken, what tensions still bind your hearts. A hush fell. Clara Benton inhaled sharply and rose. Monsieur Poirot, I am deeply ashamed that my admiration for Lord Ashcombe led me to manipulate Miss Wilkes and orchestrate this charade. Yet I found myself torn between duty to you, Lady Ashcombe, and loyalty to my late husband's memory. I placed faith in his code, believing it would compel a lasting tribute, but I see now that in doing so, I betrayed your trust. Her voice broke as she bowed her head. Margaret Wilkes halted her pacing and turned to Clara. And I, she said, voice trembling, followed you without question, fearing the consequences of inaction. I stole your pad, I wore your slipper. I staged each clue to shield you from suspicion and to serve memory. But I never asked myself if I had the right. She met Lady Ashcombe's gaze, tears glistening. "I am sorry." Dr. Crane stepped forward, smoothing his jacket. "I, too, bear responsibility. My botanical lessons supplied the means to lend authenticity to your tributes. I taught you the pinhole method to preserve specimens for science, not for secret. Messages, in my zeal for research, I neglected to consider how my methods might be co-opted." He looked at Clara and Margaret. "I apologize for unwittingly enabling your scheme." Lady Ashcombe rose, her saffron gown rustling softly. She glanced at each in turn. "Your confessions humble me, yet they also reveal the depth of your devotion to my husband, to me, and to his legacy. I understand now that your heart sought to honor what you perceived as a broken promise, but in doing so, you burdened us all with needless mystery and sorrow." She drew a steadying breath. "Let us speak plainly now. What do you fear most? As we move past this affair," Clara's shoulders trembled, "I fear losing your respect. Madam, losing my place not only as your secretary, but as someone you trusted with intimate knowledge." Her eyes filled. "I fear that my mistake may overshadow years of faithful service." Margaret's voice was husky. "I fear that my loyalty, once my greatest pride, now marks me as deceitful. I risk everything I have built in service to you." Dr. Crane nodded gravely. "My concern is that my reputation as a scientist may suffer, for though my methods were innocent, they were used in a dramatic and scientific context." Lady Ashcombe moved to the table and gathered the violet petals in her hands. "You need not fear. My dears, your devotion was misguided but not malicious. Truth, once revealed, can heal. I wish now to commemorate this lesson that promises our best kept openly, without riddles." She placed the petals gently on the dedication page. "May this symbolize both sorrow and renewal." Poirot inclined his head. "Madam, your compassion binds these hearts anew. Yet we must also ensure that the dedication Lord Ashcombe's true promise endures in a manner befitting his memory. Let us now solemnize the dedication together." He motioned to a clerk who appeared at the library door, carrying ink and quill. Lady Ashcombe took up the quill and inscribed the final flourishes on the dedication page. "To Lady Winifred Ashcombe, in everlasting remembrance and gratitude, October the 4th, as she signed. The air seemed to release its tension, and each participant exhaled, their shoulders relaxing. When the dedication was complete, Lady Ashcombe closed the book and addressed them. "Thank you for your honesty and your courage. We shall have a small gathering tomorrow to celebrate this volume's publication. It will stand not as a monument to secrecy, but as a testament to transparency, love, and friendship." She smiled, eyes bright with tears, "and all who contributed, whether by code or by caution, shall share in that celebration." Clara stepped forward and took Lady Ashcombe's hand. "Thank you, madam, for your mercy." Margaret joined her, and then Crane. One by one, they formed a circle of reconciliation around the table. Poirot watched, a gentle smile on his lips. "Msamus, the tensions have run their course. In the forge of confession and compassion, we have tempered the bonds of trust. Tomorrow's gathering will mark the final chapter of this mystery." He raised his voice slightly. "Until then, let us close the almanac on this sorrowful interlude and open our hearts to the promise of remembrance unclouded by artifice." As the afternoon light deepened into gold, the library's hush transformed into one of quiet warmth. In the wake of raised tensions and revealed secrets, a new harmony settled among them, proof that even the most intricate puzzles find their resolution when courage, compassion, and truth converge. Thought for a few seconds. Chapter 12, The Confrontation Lit. That afternoon, the library's atmosphere crackled with anticipation. Lady Ashcombe had summoned Miss Benton, Miss Wilkes, and Dr. Crane to the drawing-room under the guise of a final courtesy visit. Instead, Each found themselves seated round the central table, upon which lay the freshly bound almanac, a single marigold blossom, the solitary violet, and the torn dedication scrap encased in crystal glass. Inspector Davis lingered by the door, and Poirot stood before the mantel, his little grey cells alight with resolve. "Mesdames, monsieur," Poirot began, voice calm yet carrying an edge of authority, "we gather now for the definitive confrontation. No further clues await discovery beyond these artifacts, but each reveals a chapter of our tale. Together, they form the final tapestry of intent, method, and consequence." He picked up the marigold. This golden bloom pierced with pinholes was the first overture, a call for remembrance. Its freshness spoke of urgency. Its placement within these pages demanded attention. Poirot laid it down and raised the violet. This darker blossom, arrived next, its dew-damp petals silent in sorrow. It replaced the dedication with a warning. That memory, and tempered by sympathy, can wound. Poirot's gaze turned to the crystal case. Within this fragment lies the torn dedication hour promised to honor Lord Ashcombe's legacy, cruelly excised before binding. That act required both boldness and familiarity with the binding room's locks and schedules. He looked at each in turn. "Now, I shall recount what each of you has contributed and who among you orchestrated each chapter." He addressed Clara Benton first. "Mademoiselle, your knowledge of your employer's library, combined with Dr. Crane's botanical instruction, provided the means to create these floral messages. You taught the pinhole pressing and supplied the fresh specimens." Clara's eyes lowered, and she drew a shaky breath. Poirot then turned to Margaret Wilkes. "Miss Wilkes, your borrowed pad slip and your mistress's slipper ensured that no foreign trace marred the library's appearance, yet you left just enough to guide suspicion away from yourselves." Margaret's fingers curled around the armrest, knuckles white. He faced Dr. Crane. "Monsieur Crane, your academic enthusiasm blinded you to how your pinhole method and even your trial violets would be woven into this drama. Though unknowing, you lent authenticity to their ruse." Crane bowed his head, pince-nez in hand. Poirot lifted the torn dedication. "The final act, the removal of the dedication, required key access to the binding room and the mastery of that same botanical blade. Only one among you possessed both the pad of keys and the willingness to override protocol for the sake of remembrance." Poirot stepped back, folding his hands, and thus we arrive at the crux. "Mademoiselle Benton and Miss Wilkes, your partnership wove each thread, but who served as architect of each act?" He paused, letting the question hang. Clara's voice trembled. I initiated the plan. I believed that by invoking Lord Ashcombe's own cipher, I would compel a lasting tribute. Margaret executed my instructions, borrow the pad, slip the slipper, placed the blooms, but the torn dedication, she faltered, then pressed on. That was my idea too. I feared the book's dedication would be forgotten unless I made it unforgettable. Margaret's eyes filled. I did as Clara asked, though my heart quailed. I thought if I only carried out her plan, I would preserve her vision and Lady Ashcombe's memories. She swallowed. "I am sorry." Dr. Crane raised a gloved hand. "I too must confess. When Clara approached me for fresh violets, she claimed it was for a botanical comparison I supplied them. Trusting her motives, I never imagined they would become instruments of subterfuge." Lady Ashcombe rose, her gaze both stern and kindly. "You each acted from devotion to my late husband's memory, to his promise, to my sorrow. Yet devotion must be tempered with candor." She turned to Clara and Margaret. "Do you understand now the pain you have caused beneath your good intentions?" Clara and Margaret both nodded. Tears brimming, Poirot stepped forward, producing a small sealed envelope. By Lady Ashcombe's direction, I have prepared this letter to Lord Ashcombe's colleague, the final dedication text, acknowledging both his original promise and the trials these guardians endured. He handed it to Lady Ashcombe. She opened it and read aloud, "To my dear friend, at long last, I present the Botanist's Almanac with the dedication I once promised in life and in memory. May its pages honor both our pursuit of knowledge and the bonds of loyalty tested, yet enduring." She closed the letter gently. "Monsieur Poirot, thank you. This will be sent at once." Poirot inclined his head. "Madam, your grace in this matter exemplifies the highest tribute. And to you, Miss Benton and Miss Wilkes, I say, forgiveness is earned through truth, and truth you have delivered. Let this confrontation release your burdens and restore your reputations." He glanced at Dr. Crane, "And to you, monsieur, let this affair remind us that knowledge bears responsibility as much as discovery." As the four stood in the library's warm glow, the weight of confession lifted, replaced by a tentative hope. Lady Ashcombe gathered original first edition, now bearing both dedication and cipher openly. She held it aloft. This volume, once a source of mystery, shall now stand as a testament to honesty and remembrance. Clara and Margaret stepped forward, united in purpose. Dr. Crane placed a consoling hand on each shoulder. Together, they formed a circle of reconciliation round the almanac, its gilded pages reflecting the soft lamplight. Poirot watched, a serene smile crossing his features. Thus, the game concludes not in punishment alone, but in understanding and renewal. May each blossom here, marigold and violet alike, remind us that memory thrives best in the light of truth. As the late afternoon shadows lengthened, the library echoed with gentle conversation and the promise that, from this day forward, their bonds would be strengthened by honesty rather than obscured by secrecy, and in that restored harmony, Poirot's little grey cells finally rested, content that justice and compassion had walked hand in hand through every petal of this peculiar puzzle. Chapter 13. A new beginning. The morning after the confrontation dawned crisp and clear, sunlight filling Lady Ashcombe's library with gentle warmth. On the central table lay the freshly bound Botanist's Almanac, its dedication gleaming in gilt, "To Lady Winifred Ashcombe, in everlasting remembrance and gratitude, October the 4th, round it." The marigold and violet rested beneath, glass clocks, symbols of remembrance and sorrow reconciled. Hercule Poirot entered quietly to find Lady Ashcombe ranging these symbols with care. Miss Benton and Miss Wilkes stood nearby, their expressions a mixture of relief and anticipation, while Dr. Crane reviewed a letter of introduction for publication. Inspector Davis lingered by the door, his notebook finally closed. Poirot inclined his head. "Madam, the volume is ready for delivery. Shall we dispatch it to your colleague today?" Lady Ashcombe smiled, eyes misty with gratitude. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot. I have composed a brief note to accompany it expressing my thanks to all who contributed." She held up an embossed card. "Here it is." Dr. Crane stepped forward. "I will see that it reaches him by courier this afternoon. And, if I may, I would like to include a short preface in his next bulletin, acknowledging our shared pursuit of botanical knowledge." Lady Ashcombe nodded. "That would honor my husband's memory beautifully." Poirot turned to Miss Benton. "Mademoiselle, your service has now come full circle. Do you feel ready to continue as Lady Ashcombe's secretary?" Unburdened by our recent events, Clara's lips curved in a tentative smile. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot, your guidance has shown me that openness need not undermine devotion. I shall serve with both loyalty and candor henceforth." Poirot's gaze shifted to Miss Wilkes. "And you, Mademoiselle Wilkes, your steadfast loyalty, though once misdirected, can now be guided by transparency. Will you continue in Lady Ashcombe's household with renewed purpose. Margaret bowed her head. "It would be my honor, monsieur. I have learned that true service demands both discretion and honesty." Poirot's eyes met those of each. "Excellent. And you, Dr. Crane, shall join them in celebrating the almanac's publication next week, I trust?" Dr. Crane nodded. "It will be a pleasure, even a celebration of lessons learned, both botanical and human." Lady Ashcombe placed her hand on the almanac's cover. "I think a small gathering in this room would be fitting, friends and colleagues, each sharing a memory of Lord Ashcombe and his beloved marigolds." Poirot offered a warm smile. "A fitting tribute." "Madam, may it be the first of many gatherings, held under the auspices of truth and remembrance." As they made their plans, the library's shelves seemed to sigh with contentment, the weight of secrecy replaced by the lightness of reconciliation. Poirot stepped back, surveying the room. One final time. The marigold's gold had softened into warmth, the violet's dusk into gentle remembrance. All had found their proper place. He approached Lady Ashcombe quietly. "Madam, may I take my leave? I must return to London this evening." She inclined her head. "Of course, Monsieur Poirot. You have given us far more than answers you, have restored faith." Poirot bowed respectfully. "Then my mission is accomplished, until our paths cross again. Madam, may your days be filled with clear light and honest blooms." With that, he turned and departed, cane tapping softly on the threshold. Left in the lingering glow of morning, Lady Ashcombe and her companions watched him go. The almanac awaited its journey. The dedication would at last be fulfilled, and in the hearts of all, our promise, once hidden in code, now shown openly. In that new beginning, memory and truth would grow side by side, flowers unafraid of the light. Chapter 14. The celebration and reflection a week later. Lady Ashcombe's library shimmered with festive warmth. Crystal chandeliers cast prisms across the gilded shelves, and the long mahogany table was draped in deep saffron cloth, embroidered with marigolds and violets in honor of Lord Ashcombe. Memory, esteemed guests, fellow members of the Cryptogamic and Yeast Preservation Society, literary friends of Lady Ashcombe, and colleagues of Dr. Crane murmured in quiet anticipation as Miss Benton arranged copies of the newly dedicated Botanist's Almanac on silver platters. Poirot arrived shortly after 6, his impeccable evening dress contrasting with the riot of autumnal colors. He exchanged polite bows with Lady Ashcombe and Inspector Davis, who stood by the library door to ensure the evening proceeded smoothly. Lady Ashcombe welcomed him with a gentle smile. "Monsieur Poirot, we are honored by your presence tonight. We celebrate not only the almanac's dedication, but the renewal of trust among those who served me so faithfully." Poirot inclined his head. "Madam, it is my privilege to witness the restoration of harmony. May this gathering reflect the true spirit of remembrance your husband inspired." As guests took their seats on velvet-upholstered chairs, Dr. Crane rose to deliver the evening's first address. "Esteemed friends," he began, voice echoing softly, "we gather to honor a man whose passion for botany united mankind in the pursuit of knowledge. His final promise, now fulfilled, reminds us that the smallest specimens can bear the weightiest of meanings." He gestured to Lady Ashcombe. "Will you do the honors of presenting the dedication?" She stood and, under a soft chorus of applause, unveiled the gilded cover. "To my dear husband," she read. "May this dedication serve as a testament to your unwavering devotion to blossoms, to memory, and to your beloved Winifred." The audience rose, toasting the couple's enduring bond. Poirot caught Clara Benton's eye. She offered a shy nod of gratitude as Margaret Wilkes gently squeezed her hand. After the speeches, guests mingled along the rows of pressed specimens displayed in glass cases. One table showcased the marigold and violet underclocks, accompanied by a small plaque symbols of remembrance and sorrow, united in truth. Readers paused to admire the delicate perforations in each petal. Whispering about the intricate methods once hidden from view, Poirot strolled among them. Conversing sparingly but observing the subtle transformations, a young botanist approached. "Him, Monsieur Poirot, your insight guided us through a most delicate affair. How did you discern the hidden cipher among so many distractions?" Poirot smiled modestly. "My little grey cells simply follow the patterns truths leave behind, whether in petal wings or penciled marginalia. The heart of any mystery beats in the smallest detail. Nearby." Miss Benton and Miss Wilkes stood side by side, reviewing the evening's program. A guest remarked on the harmony restored between the two, to which Miss Benton replied softly. Confession and compassion leveled every doubt. Margaret added, "And now our loyalty finds its true expression." Across the room, Lady Ashcombe thanked guests individually, her warmth genuine. She paused when she reached Dr. Crane, offering him a pressed violet as a token of gratitude. "Your expertise, though misapplied at first, has blossomed into a beautiful collaboration," he bowed. Accepting the violet, "It is I who am grateful, madam, for the lesson that every method must serve a higher truth." As the clock chimed 9, Poirot followed Lady Ashcombe to the hearth for one final toast. She lifted a crystal glass of elderflower cordial, to truth revealed, to friendships renewed, and to the promise that memory, honoured openly, need never sober into sorrow. Poirot mirrored her gesture, to memory and honesty. They clinked glasses, the clear note ringing through the hushed library. When the guests drifted away, satisfied and glowing, Poirot lingered by the now empty table. Lady Ashcombe joined him, handing him the crystal containing the violet. "Please accept this, Monsieur Poirot, as a reminder of your kindness." He received the token with a small bow. "I shall cherish it, madam, as I cherish the lessons learned here together." They viewed the rows of bound volumes and pressed specimens, symbols of a mystery that had led them through deception to renewal. In the fading glow of the chandeliers, the library's silence spoke of promise fulfilled and of a future brightened by the light of truth. As Poirot departed into the crisp autumn night, his cane tapping a steady rhythm, the library's doors closed gently behind him. Within, Lady Ashcombe, Miss Benton, Miss Wilkes, and Dr. Crane remained, their hearts unburdened and their bonds strengthened, carrying forward the memory of marigolds and violets. Entwined forever in honest remembrance. Chapter 15. Legacy of Remembranceto. Weeks after the triumphant celebration, Bloomsbury had settled into a gentle rhythm of autumn. Lady Ashcombe's Lions of Remembrance, the botanist's almanac bound with its gilded dedication, sat in the Athenaeum Club's catalogue. Accession number for 1879, outside. Fallen marigold petals lay like embers in crisp wind. Inside her library, Lady Ashcombe presided over a final small gathering, a private breakfast with Miss Benton, Miss Wilkes, and Dr. Crane, each invited to share how life had resumed after so tumultuous a season. The low morning sun streamed through the windows as Clara Benton poured tea, her movements calm and assured. "Madam," she said, "I have prepared the clerk's report summarizing the new binding and dedication. It will join Lord Ashcombe's archives." She placed a neat stack of papers beside the silver tray, pride shining in her eyes. Lady Ashcombe nodded in appreciation. "Your diligence honors his legacy, Clara. I see now that protocol and passion need not conflict, but coexist in harmony." Margaret Wilkes stirred her porridge slowly, speaking next. "I have reorganized the library's filing, madam, to include a section on memory and method. It will help future scholars understand the interplay between botanical practice and human narrative." Her voice carried both humility and resolve. Dr. Crane, seated near the casement, sipped coffee before adding, "I have submitted an article to the Gardener's Monthly. detailing the pinhole preservation and the symbolic roles of Marigold and Violet. I aim to transform our ordeal into a lesson for the wider scientific community. Lady Ashcombe's gaze softened on each in turn. Your contributions ensure that Lord Ashcombe's work and our experience will enlighten others, but there remains one voice missing. She paused, placing her hand on the few pages before her. Clara bent forward. Is it? Lady Ashcombe smiled. A final note to Monsieur Poirot himself. In gratitude for his guidance through our labyrinth of petals and ciphers, she offered a sealed envelope. Miss Wilkes took it reverently. Would you like me to deliver it? Madam. No, Lady Ashcombe replied. It is best sent by special messenger, as befits his station. She looked toward the door as it opened quietly. Hercule Poirot entered, coat in hand, his mustaches perfectly groomed. He bowed slightly. Madam, you summoned me once more. Lady Ashcombe rose. Only to offer my deepest thanks and to present this token of our esteem. She handed him the envelope. It contains my final reflections and the assurance that your wisdom has ensured our memories remain unclouded. Poirot accepted the envelope, his dark eyes warm. Madam, your graciousness honors me more than any accolade. He placed his hand over his heart. The little grey cells find their greatest reward when truth and compassion bloom together. He paused, gazing round the library. I trust that in years to come, when scholars consult this almanac, they will uncover not only botanical lore, but the tale of how remembrance, both golden and violet, can guide us back to harmony. Margaret stepped forward. Monsieur Poirot, will you visit us again when the next edition appears? Poirot smiled. With pleasure. Mademoiselle, for every book holds its own mysteries, and every heart its hidden petals. As he departed into the crisp morning, the envelope clutched under his arm. The library's hush felt softly triumphant. Lady Ashcombe watched the door close, then turned to her companions. Let us begin anew, she said, knowing that memory, honored openly, shall always flourish. In the gathering of light and shadow, the promise of truth remained evergreen, an enduring legacy of one Marigold Bookmark, the detective whose little grey cells saw beyond every mysterious veil. Chapter 16. An unanticipated letter 3 days. After the almanac's publication celebration, Lady Ashcombe's library felt serenely restored to its former calm. The shelves gleamed in the early autumn dusk, and the crystal clocks still sheltered the Marigold and Violet. Poirot, returning for a final courtesy visit, found Lady Ashcombe at her writing desk, pen in hand, paused as though contemplating her words. Monsieur Poirot, she greeted, offering him a cup of tea. I trust London treated you well. 'Tis been. Madam, Poirot replied, settling into an armchair. I received your kind letter and have been considering the lessons of our shared mystery. He sipped his tea and noticed an envelope propped against the inkpot. The seal was unfamiliar, a simple monogram. Each W beneath, the address read in a hesitant hand. To Monsieur Hercule Poirot. Athenaeum Club. Curious, Poirot accepted. The letter. Madam, did you receive correspondence in my honour? Lady Ashcombe shook her head. Not to my knowledge. Let me see. She examined the envelope, but could recall no such note driving through her usual channels. Poirot broke the seal and unfolded the sheet within. The letter read, Monsieur Poirot, your little grey cells have done admirably in unravelling the Marigold puzzle. Yet another mystery lies hidden within these walls, one unspoken by even the most devoted. Should you care to investigate, meet me at the Athenaeum Club's Rose Room tomorrow at noon. Each W. Poirot's brow arched. Each W. You say. The initials echo Lady Ashcombe's maiden name. But she assures me no such note passed through her hand. Lady Ashcombe frowned thoughtfully. Indeed, I would have known. My correspondence is carefully logged." She turned to Inspector Davis, who had quietly entered. "Behind Poirot, Inspector. Has any such letter been received at the club?" Inspector Davis retrieved his notebook. "I have no record. Madam, no courier delivery. No club member filing. It must have been slipped directly into Monsieur Poirot's pocket." Poirot tapped the letter. "Then our sender is bold and intimate with these proceedings. Someone wishes to draw me back to the Athenaeum for a new enigma." Lady Ashcombe's gaze sharpened. "Could this be related to the almanac's printing? I have heard murmurs that the first edition already shows a slight misprint on page 349. Errant decimal in a plant classification." Poirot's mustaches twitched. "An errant decimal. That would be unusual in a carefully proofread scholarly volume." He thought aloud. Each W could stand for Mr. Henry Warner, the club's printer and stationery purveyor, whose name appears on the binding receipt. Inspector Davis nodded. "He supplied the embossing plates and handled the gilding. I can summon him." Lady Ashcombe rose. "Perhaps he has information or a request for you, Monsieur Poirot." The next day at noon, Poirot found the rose room in the Athenaeum suffused with pale light. Fresh arrangements of white tea roses lined the windowsill. A single chair awaited him before a small table strewn with binding tools and proof sheets. Moments later, Mr. Henry Warner appeared sleek, silver-haired, in a crisply tailored suit. He greeted Poirot with a respectful nod. "Monsieur Poirot, I trust you received my note." "You did indeed." Poirot said, sitting. "You wish to draw my attention to a misprint." Warner exhaled. "Yes, in the dedication, the date reads October 5th instead of October 4th. A small error, but one that contradicts Lady Ashcombe's wishes and Lord Ashcombe's cipher." He slid a proof sheet across the table. Poirot examined it, noticing the 5 stamped wherever should have been. This aligns with the misnumbered classification you mentioned." Warner continued. "It seemed someone altered the type matrix after our initial proof, between our sessions and final binding. Whoever did so aimed to shift the date by a single day, perhaps a subtle sign or deliberate obfuscation of the cipher." Poirot leaned back. "A change so slight suggests an insider unfamiliar with the binding schedule and type cases, who among Lady Ashcombe's circle had access to your workshop." Warner named the usual staff, then paused. "Miss Benton visited once to review library stamps, and Miss Wilkes accompanied her briefly. Dr. Crane never entered, but Lady Ashcombe herself came to request earlier proofs." Poirot's eyes glinted. "The error appeared only in the final binding, not in your proofs." "Precisely, and when I returned the unbound pages to my workshop, I found the matrix for the 4 replaced by the 5. Warner's voice lowered. "It took me hours to discover and correct, risking our delivery schedule." Poirot tapped his cane. "Then our new mystery emerges. Who tampered with the date, and why? A change from the 4th to the 5th would obscure Lord Ashcombe's cipher, rendering the marginal code meaningless to future readers." Warner nodded solemnly. "Exactly. I feared it was mere typo, but the alignment with the cipher date suggests a deliberate act. That afternoon, Poirot, Davis, and Warner returned to Lady Ashcombe's library, the misprinted almanac in hand. Lady Ashcombe received them with concern. "Another twist," she murmured. Poirot laid the book open. "Madam, Mr. Warner discovered that between proof and binding, the date was altered. Our question: who accessed the binding matrix? And what motive could they have to erase your husband's cipher? More importantly, why now, weeks after our resolution?" Lady Ashcombe's eyes narrowed. "Only Miss Benton and Miss Wilkes knew of my schedule in the binding room, but Clara confessed her role in the cipher's public restoration. I cannot imagine her now seeking to undo it." Poirot inclined his head. "Perhaps not to undo, but to protect. The date shift may reflect a fear that the cipher October the 4th carries to public await. Inviting unwelcome scrutiny, Inspector Davis added, and Miss Wilkes, ever cautious, could believe that even an accurate date sows confusion among casual readers. A one-day shift would render the code inert. Poirot folded the misprinted page. We must consider both women. Tomorrow we shall revisit their quarters for any sign of the binding matrix replica, a small wooden block likely concealed for this purpose. Lady Ashcombe exhaled. If this proves true, I shall be heartbroken, but I must know the truth. Poirot placed his hand on her arm. Fear not, madam, the little grey cells will illuminate even this faint shadow, for no deception, however subtle, can long endure under patient scrutiny. As the dusk deepened beyond the windows, the library's quiet splendor held within it another secret, one last strand of mystery binding hearts and pages alike, waiting to yield its known and unknown together under Poirot's discerning eye. Chapter 17. The binding room. Cape early the next morning. The grey London sky pressed its chill against the windows of Lady Ashcombe's library as Hercule Poirot, Inspector Davis, and Mr. Henry Warrener reconvened for the latest phase of their inquiry. The misprinted date in the botanist's almanac, October the 5th instead of the 4th, loomed over them like an open wound in the bindings gilt. Monsieur Poirot, Warrener began, loosening his cravat, I have secured a replica of the small wooden matrix block used for the date numerals. It is roughly 2 inches high, set aside in my workshop after the binding house returned it. He produced a slender, varnished block with carved relief. Whoever tampered with the date substituted the 4 plate for a 5, then returned it, hoping I would not notice. Poirot nodded. Lifting the matrix block, he turned it in the light, observing the fine grain and the cut of its digits, perfectly crafted. He placed it carefully in a small evidence bag. Now, we must determine who had both opportunity and motive to visit the binding room after Warrener's proofs left his workshop, and before the almanac reached Lady Ashcombe. Inspector Davis consulted his notebook. The binding room is in the club's basement, accessible only to staff and members by key or by request. Miss Benton visited to review stamp placements, and Miss Wilkes accompanied her. No other member recalled entering at that time. Lady Ashcombe folded her hands. Both Clara and Margaret confessed to the earlier floral deceptions. Could one of them have, without the other's knowledge, slipped into the binding room? Poirot inclined his head. We shall see. I propose we visit their respective quarters at the club and at the Mews, searching for any evidence of the matrix block's temporary concealment. He turned to Warrener. I ask you to accompany us to verify the block's return. First, they proceeded to Miss Clara Benton's desk in Lady Ashcombe's antechamber. Under the lamp's glow, every writing implement gleamed in tidy rows. Poirot gently tapped the drawers, instructing Inspector Davis to open each in turn. They found nothing out of the ordinary. No wooden block, no signs of varnish dust, and no mysterious indentations. Poirot inspected the blotter, brushing aside a few flecks of amber-petal dust. He sniffed lightly. Marigold, but no trace of lacquer or wood shavings. Miss Benton's station appears untainted by the presence of our matrix block. Lady Ashcombe exhaled. Then Clara could not have hidden it here. Clara, summoned by gentle invitation, stood by the doorway. Poirot met her gaze. Madam, your desk is immaculate. Yet you visited the binding room once. Does that suggest your purpose was strictly to review the proofs? Clara nodded firmly. Yes, monsieur. I left immediately after verifying the dedications. I had no cause to linger. Poirot inclined his head. Very well. Let us proceed to the Mews. In the narrow lane behind Bloomsbury, Margaret Wilkes's attic room awaited not so tidy as Clara's quarters. The uniform lay tossed on a chair, and a basket of laundry sat by the hearth. Poirot motioned Inspector Davis to search beneath the bedding, and behind the trunk Davis lifted the cushion from a plush armchair, revealing a shallow recess. Poirot tapped the underside. "Yes, hollow," he murmured. "Let us look inside." He retrieved the basket and emptied its contents. Onto the floor a scattering of linens, slippers, and a single perfume vial. Amid them lay a small wooden object, the very matrix block, its varnish edged with dust and minute flecks of clipped marigold petal. Margaret gasped, covering her mouth. No, no, it cannot be. Poirot gently withdrew the block and placed it on the table. "Madam, protectress of Lady Ashcombe's peace, you secured the binding matrix here after substituting the numeral. You then returned to the library, believing no trace remained except this." He tapped the block. "The varnish retained dust from the marigold petals, evidence of your previous floral operations." Margaret's shoulders collapsed. She sank to her knees, voice breaking. "I only wished to ensure the dedication honoured Lord Ashcombe's promise, monsieur, when I learned Clara, and I had overzealously inserted his cipher. I feared the binding would circulate with a visible flaw, so I corrected the date to 5th, believing the code's magic rested not on the number, but on remembrance itself." She closed her eyes. "I did not want to undo the cipher, only to protect its spirit." Lady Ashcombe knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "Margaret, your heart was in service, but service demands fidelity to truth." Poirot nodded solemnly. "Your final deception rose from fear of imperfection. Yet, as with the floral tributes, even a small alteration can unravel the finest patterns. We must now consider the consequences." Inspector Davis noted in his book. Miss Wilkes admitted tampering with binding matrix. Motive, protection of cipher spirit. Method, concealment until after substitution. Evidence, matrix block with marigold residue. Poirot turned to Lady Ashcombe. "Madam, the almanac's final binding will require one more correction. May I suggest you petition Mr. Warrener for an updated edition bearing the correct date, and Lord Ashcombe's cipher deliberately included as an explanatory marginal note." Lady Ashcombe drew a steadying breath. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot, and Margaret, if you would accompany me to the club tomorrow to oversee this final edition." Margaret rose, tears glistening. "I will." "Madam, I will face whatever censure awaits." Poirot offered her a kind nod. "Your contrition is clear. May your honesty now temper any judgment." Clara Benton stepped forward, voice soft. "Margaret, I am sorry I involved you in this secondary deception." She gently took Margaret's hand. "Let us go together and ensure this last correction honours both my husband's memory and your service." Dr. Crane inclining his head. "I will assist as well, to verify that all botanical references remain intact." As the group prepared to depart, Lady Ashcombe paused. "Monsieur Poirot, I owe you so much guidance through floral puzzles, cryptic codes, and binding intrigues." Poirot smiled warmly. "Madam, the pleasure has been mine." The final correction closes our chapter and opens the way for many more to study Lord Ashcombe's work in full light. They left the library together, the matrix block secured for evidence and tomorrow's restoration. In the hush of that serene corridor, Poirot reflected on the human impulse to perfect and the lessons learned when truth demands its own final binding. Chapter 18. The final edition a week later. The Athenaeum Club's binding room hummed with quiet industry as Monsieur Henry Warrener oversaw the printing of the corrected Botanist's Almanac. Lady Ashcombe, Miss Benton, Miss Wilkes, and Dr. Crane gathered in respectful anticipation, each bearing tokens of the months of turmoil. Oppressed marigold, a dew-dark violet, and the tiny wooden matrix recovered at last, Warner lifted the newly cast numeral block, this time inscribed for with deliberate flourish, and placed it into the typecase. Voila! He announced softly. The date is once more October the 4th, as Lady Ushcombe wished, and Lord Ushcombe's cipher stands restored. He guided Clara Benton to inspect the first leaf of the dedication page, ink still dewy. She traced the gilt date with a trembling fingertip. Perfect, she whispered. Margaret Wilkes exhaled with relief. Her eyes bright. No more shadows, she said, voice thick with emotion. Dr. Crane nodded, examining the marginal note now added beneath Lord Ushcombe's entry. Note, the date October 4th. Commemorates the day this rare Taggart's was first collected. Each W, the initials HW, echoed both the cipher and Warner's monogram, leaving no further mystery. Lady Ushcombe stepped forward, touching the gilded spine. Thank you all. This edition embodies not only botanical knowledge, but the trials we endured and the truth we upheld at last. She turned to Poirot, who had arrived silently to oversee the final proof. His keen eyes scanned the pages one by one, ensuring no trace of error remained. With a satisfied nod, Poirot closed the volume. Madam, the little grey cells may rest. Your husband's promise, once hidden, now shines openly. May future generations study his work and our story without confusion. He addressed the assembled quartet, and you, who bore the weight of devotion, may now carry forward with renewed dignity. Clara Benton stepped to Lady Ushcombe's side. It is an honor to lend my dedication to this edition, Margaret. Wilkes brushed a hand across the matrix block, now harmless in its restored context. I will cherish this lesson always, she said. Dr. Crane held the final copy aloft. And I shall use this corrected page to preface my forthcoming article, a testament to diligence, both scientific and moral. Poirot turned to Lady Ushcombe once more. Madam, the stages of our mystery, from Marigold to Violet, from cipher buried to cipher revealed, have taught us that remembrance demands both subtlety and candor. In the garden of human affairs, truth is the finest bloom. She inclined her head, her eyes glistening. And your counsel, Monsieur Poirot, has been the gardener's hand tending each secret until it could open in the light. As evening fell, the four stood in a semicircle, the corrected almanac their common bond. Poirot gathered his cane and coat. My work here is done. May your days be bright with honest remembrance. With gentle bows and heartfelt farewells, they left him in the quiet binding room. Poirot stepped into the lamplit corridor, the fragrance of marigold still faint in the air. His parting smile was one of quiet triumph, another complex puzzle laid to rest through observation, compassion, and the unerring logic of his little grey cells. Outside, the night air was cool, London's lamp-posts gleaming like distant stars. Poirot raised his head, moustaches twitching with satisfaction, onto the next mystery. He murmured, for the world abounds in secrets waiting to bloom, and with that, Hercule Poirot departed, leaving behind a legacy of truth, redemption, and blossoms that would speak of memory and hope for years to come.